It's me.
She's a former mayor. They're a former evangelical pastor with dissociative identity disorder. These two like to talk about the topics you're not supposed to talk about. They might cause you to perspire just a bit, but they'll definitely make you inspired. Let's talk religion and politics, and what spirituality and emotional well-being look like in a post-evangelical world. This is Paul and Ashley on Evangelicalish.
All right, here we are on a Wednesday night.
We're back.
Wednesday Night Live. Yeah, we were off last week.
I feel a certain amount of energy like pumping through my body right now because it's amazing what 1 week of a break will do. Like, I'm so excited. Well, for that reason, but also because we have an amazing guest tonight. But yay, it's Wednesday and time for Evangelicalish.
An absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. So,
and we have our Christmas decorations up.
Yeah, thankfully. Should we tell our slightly sad but also funny and fine Thanksgiving story? Or
yeah,
like,
of course.
Okay, so I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. And for those of you who are joining live, please drop us a line in the chat. Tell us what you did for Thanksgiving. What was your favorite part? Did you find we had spent a couple weeks kind of ramping up to it's time for the holidays and
can we also say to our Indigenous friends, happy Indigenous People
Absolutely.
Day.
Yeah. Yes.
And we apologize.
Yes, very much so. And yes.
Yes.
So anyway, we had last.
You don't know how to respond to that one.
Yeah, because I also forget the words. Like I know there are the right words to say, and I forget the right words. So now I'm just kind of trying to move on. Okay. Said every white person always. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So but the evangelical-ish fans among us will remember that our last show, we had an amazing therapist on to help coach everybody on like, hey, it's time to start interfacing with family and like, what are some skills and tools and how are we going to navigate that? So that was our last show. Then we go to Thanksgiving week / Indigenous People week. So we end up with Paul and I literally in the drive-thru of McDonald's on Thanksgiving.
Well, we went to a movie.
We went to a movie.
Our kids were otherwise occupied for Thanksgiving this year.
Sent our son to his wonderful girlfriend's home where they had the most delicious gourmet, everything beautiful, because like they're all brilliant chefs.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, he's taken care of. Daughter stays back in New Jersey. Boyfriend goes to see her. Okay, she's got wonderful plans. And then Paul and I are looking at each other and like, well, what are we gonna do? Well, so we go see a movie, which is wonderful. We're going to talk about it, Wicked. And then we're hungry.
Yeah, we're going to finish the show talking about Wicked. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, gosh, I didn't think I was going to miss the meal because I don't crave it normally. And then I was like, it's like 12:30 on Thursday. And I'm like, oh my God, where's the dressing? Where's the turkey? Where's the And all of a sudden felt very sorry for myself and for Paul because
I didn't know this was going on.
I know. I'm telling you.
You're just like, let's get something to eat.
I often share my true feelings. I hold them until this podcast.
Oh, okay. So what we didn't realize, maybe we had some idea, but nothing is open on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's really shut down.
Yes.
Probably more so even than Christmas.
I think so. Yeah.
But anyway, we did make good use of the day. We got our decorations up and that was fun.
So you mentioned it, but just to make the point, we ended up at the drive-thru at McDonald's for Thanksgiving lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
We literally are those people that had McDonald's for Thanksgiving.
We're like, God, what a bunch of sad sacks going to the drive-thru. Oh, that's us.
And we were not alone in the drive-thru, just so you know. We were not the only people there. So
yeah.
But you did make some amazing cookies and we grilled steak on Friday.
That's what we did.
We did on Friday with our son and his girlfriend.
We had steak dinner on Friday and kind of kicked off the holiday season that way. So
yeah. So yes. And we decorated because we want it decorated when our daughter comes home in our House looks like a winter wonderland.
Yeah, I'm wondering how everyone else did this last week with your holiday time. Seeing a few comments in the chat, which is great. And if you are downloading and listening to this podcast and not seeing those comments, we're so glad that you're tuning in. Thanks for listening. And we're hearing lots of comments from folks saying, Ashley, that's probably not the healthiest thing to
Holding your
withhold
feelings
everything and then just like blurt it out on a podcast. So that's all that you've missed if you are not watching this live.
Well, this is like your therapy session then tonight. So good. I'm glad you're getting to share it out. And our guest is the perfect one to help you with that tonight. Dr. Jamie Marich is our guest tonight. She's an author of over 15 books and manuals in the field of trauma, recovery, and expressive arts. Her work is increasingly appealing to a wider audience than just her clinical colleagues. She seeks to create material that facilitates transformation for the reader and many others. And she's actually just a fabulous person. And she and I vibe a lot because we both have parts and systems and dissociative identity disorder. So yay.
Yay.
Dr.
Yay.
Jamie. And she has a new book out called You Lied to Me About God, which could there be a better title than that? Hi, Jamie.
Welcome.
Hi to both of you. It's such a delight to be here. I'm now craving McDonald's after your story. not the healthiest thing to crave, I know. We're human. We admit our humanity.
And it wasn't even, sometimes you go through the drive-thru at McDonald's and you're like, oh my God, these are the best McDonald's fries. Like they got it just right. And
Yeah.
It wasn't even that. It was like kind of like a stale leftover, not great McDonald's experience. So
I know the phenomenon.
Anyway. Yeah.
To me, I think it's just as a child going to McDonald's was that was for us like the big experience.
That's it.
Going to McDonald's and Pizza Hut,
Well, and we're a little older, I would imagine, than Dr. Jamie, but we grew up like Paul and I grew up in the Southern Midwest, and then you grew up in like the actual Midwest. And I remember like precisely like when we got the first McDonald's in town, and that was back when they would do birthday parties at McDonald's, and you could get like, a little sheet cake with kind of hard candy on top. And yeah, those were really special. Like it was like you were eating out when you went to McDonald's. It wasn't fast food. It was like you had dined out, So
to give away my generation, I'm a child of the Pizza Hut Book It generation, where we got rewarded with pizza to read a certain amount of books. So I came of age in the 80s and early 90s. So
I do remember.
No,
I do remember certain things. Although we had Godfather's pizza. You remember Godfather's? Of course, the person who founded the chain went on to work in Trump 1 and then passed away from COVID after attending a rally during the pandemic in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But that pizza was lights out awesome. And you could only get it in that part of the country.
Right. Well, I feel like we could talk about food for an hour, but
we could.
I know we have other things to talk about.
Well, I'll just say real quick. I want to give a little just what's been going on in our house, Jamie, leading up to tonight. Like,
sure.
I feel like morning and night, what I'm hearing from Paul is like, I have so much in common with Dr. Jamie. Like, I can't wait to talk to her. Like, and then like, I'm listening on audio, and then did you hear? So this is a big night for us, and we're really glad you could join us.
Yeah,
really
did love the book, and we're in a crazy world right now, as many have noticed, and I. As a promo for tonight, posted a clip from your TED Talk on YouTube, and you talked about how, in some ways, our society is kind of under a group trauma almost, and we don't talk about it enough. You were saying, and so talk about that. What is happening in our society with trauma, and why do we not talk about it more? And what is the impact it's having on us as a society?
So as I go into in further detail in that TED Talk, we have to understand that trauma just means wound. When we talk about psychological trauma, it just comes from the Greek word meaning wound. And I feel that we can simplify our explanation of trauma if we look at it through that lens, that Wounds come in different shapes and sizes. Some may have a greater degree of severity that may require further care or extended care. Yet we have all been wounded in one way or another in life. And when we don't tend our wounds, when we don't let our wounds heal, we inevitably bleed all over each other. And that is a big part of why I call trauma the greatest public health crisis we don't address as a public health crisis. And I gave that TEDx talk and started this metaphor even before COVID, which is often seen as this great collective traumatic experience we went through. But why we don't like to talk about it is because a lot of us are programmed not to, with messaging like don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. For those of us who came up in church, things like give it to God, just pray about it. You're weak if you're admitting that something's wrong and you're not trusting in God enough. And of course, in a lot of these church cultures we come from, talking about trauma is threatening to the power structures. And so we're suppressed with messaging like you are the unforgiving spirit if you don't forgive them and move on. So it's uncomfortable to talk about, to address. Yet here we are inevitably living with the impact of generations of it, millennia of it.
Jumping into your analogy is also when we have a wound, if somebody bumps it, they may think, oh, I barely touched you, but we're like, oh my God, that hurt. And so when we talk about a racism or an oppressed group feeling hurt, the other people are like, what? I didn't do anything. Or why do you care about pronouns? Because the other side has a big gaping wound that it doesn't take a lot for it to hurt.
And it is a completely subjective construct that you're getting at that what is traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you,
right,
based on our lived experience, based on certain variables. And one of the worst things we can do is to judge someone else's experience through the lens of our own. And I know, Ashley, you made the joke about white people in the opening segment, but white people are great at doing that. To say, hey, but I got through it. Why can't you?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally. Yeah. Right. Or yeah, I mean, all the things like, like that, everything that speaks to dismissing the pain and dismissing the effects. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting. You want to ask something, Ashley? I'm sorry. I was giving you.
Yeah.
I was trying not to be the white male
the
dominator.
talkie.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know there's a bunch of different directions we want to go tonight. I just kind of reacting to what you just said and put out there, like what I'm noticing kind of on the other side of deconstructing evangelicalism and maybe to some extent Christianity, but like I probably bracket it that way. Like for sure, the evangelical stuff is really clearly in the rearview mirror. But I mean, the thing that haunts is this, like, this message about the unforgiving spirit and this, like, that like there is no room whatsoever for mental health, access to mental health. I mean, like what I'm finding post evangelicalism is like, I have all these like almost, I would say, spiritual encounters in my therapy sessions with a mental health professional. And I just think to myself, how in the world is it that for decades prior, I was in a church environment where there was no such access or room for access to mental health? I mean, maybe there were a few like Christian counselors in our congregation, but they had to kind of code and whisper about like what, they were a counselor, they weren't a therapist, right? It's like, that was a more acceptable thing. So anyway, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this notion of like, you have to forgive at all times or else, you're keeping yourself handcuffed to the person. And like we all get kind of stuck in that spiral, I would say, who've come from this religious background.
Yes. And forgiveness is a convenient theology for abusive systems. Yeah. Because when something is clearly wrong and needs to be addressed, the forgiveness card can be pulled that, well, it's biblical, it's Christian to forgive. And so if you're not forgiving, you're the problem. And I mean, from a social justice trauma therapy perspective, that's how I see it. I get asked a lot as a trauma therapist, do you have to forgive in order to move on? And my ultimate answer to that question, and I get at a little of this in the book, is I do think forgiveness is fundamentally a theological, spiritual thing where I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, if you can forgive genuinely, and I believe I have, but I've had to work through a lot of stuff first.
Mhm.
And at earlier points in my life, I did a lot of surface level forgiveness where I was like, oh,
Yep.
yeah, I forgive mom and dad. But then there was still stuff to wade through. And now I believe I have deeply forgiven them. They would think otherwise, though, because I'm
Yeah.
sharing the story, right?
Yeah.
So I think forgiveness, like many things, can even be subjective. But what I tell my clients a lot is I think forgiveness is something that's fundamentally a theological, spiritual thing, whereas your healing, your trauma recovery may be removed from that. It might be that some degree of acceptance is required. And acceptance, I want to clarify, does not mean you have to like things. It does not mean that you're saying things are okay. Acceptance is that practice of I'm going to stop fighting the reality that this thing happened. And it goes to when we talk about trauma as wound, that wounds can heal in a variety of ways. Some wounds, even in the physical sense, may never truly heal, like in the cases of chronic illnesses, injuries, or disabilities, but we could learn to adapt to them and still live thriving and meaningful lives. So I don't know, the longer I've lived this thing called life and I've looked at a variety of spiritual paths and clinical paths, I think a lot of things could work for people in their healing. And I think so much of what pain and distress is about is we get on our high horses about what people should do.
Yeah.
Instead of supporting them with what they need.
Yeah.
Mm.
Would you just one follow-up question? This might be splitting the hair a little bit, but like, would you say, as you feel like you have deeply forgiven, were you pursuing that, or was that was just the outgrowth of your healing resulted in some kind of release that you would say you put the word forgiveness on it?
The latter.
Okay.
The latter. Because I think another way I look at forgiveness is, this is very non-theological. My Sunday school teachers and either religion I grew up in would not like this, but a lot of how I have moved on is to, am I allowed to swear on the podcast?
Absolutely.
I thought so, but I didn't
Hell
want to
yes.
assume. I was going to go deeper than that. But
Please.
I kind of developed this mantra, I'm not going to let the fuckers win.
Yeah.
And that has helped me tremendously through the years in a lot of different areas of recovery. And I see forgiveness as a way I can practice that. It's not saying that I'm okay with what they did. It's not saying I have to have a relationship with them for what they did, but it is saying you're not going to have this power over me anymore. And if we're, kind of doing the grand talk on forgiveness here, I think a lot of us can agree the biggest forgiving we had to do is of ourselves.
Yeah.
My favorite meme out there in the interwebs is, I'm sorry for the things I said when I was an evangelical teenager. Right? I'm sorry for the things I did when I was an obnoxious pro-life Catholic, making you think that I was better than you. And so, yes, that's a lot of the forgiveness I had to do of myself and some other very shameful situations that I was exposed to in my drinking and in some of my wandering. So, yeah.
What was the thing you were saying the other day, Ashley, that, I was at the gym and somebody said, God, you're so fat and weak and worthless. What are you doing here? And that person saying that to me was me.
Right.
You would never say that to anybody else at the gym, but you say it to yourself. And and to me, that's the thing about forgiveness is I was never allowed, honor your mother and father. I was never allowed to be angry at them. So I could only be angry at myself. And you have to go through that anger. And your story, which you laid out so beautifully in your new book, You Lied to Me About God. Obviously, when we think about trauma, we think about a lot of things, but for you, it kind of centers some around religion and from a Catholic, lineage. Really, it was a part of the fabric of your household, not just a religious thing, but a household thing. And then your dad finds and my dad was an Assembly of God pastor, so
Right.
I'm recovering Assemblies of God. Your dad finds the Assemblies of God, and it creates this place where you're in between these two religions. So tell us a little bit about how that created trauma for you as a child.
Oh, 100%. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a memoir, because I love that there are so many evangelical memoirs out there right now, and I relate to so many of them. Yet I feel what makes my story unique is that not only did I get the shameful messages, the purity culture stuff on the evangelical side, but a lot of my religious wounding was being fought over for denominational allegiance and alliance. So yeah, Pastor Paul set it up pretty well, that when I was 5, 6 years old, all of a sudden my dad was going to this different church. And for a kid, the evangelical VBS culture is a lot more fun than Catholic Mass, right? So I think there was some, if I may say, subtle grooming happening there. So yeah, I did find Dad's church fun to go to initially, but then when the shaming stuff and the rapture anxiety really came through, it was not so fun. But my mother, after my dad converted, I think he was expecting her to follow along. And she, if anything, doubled down on her Catholicism and her pride on being Catholic. And as I share in the memoir, I now have a brother who's a Catholic priest because he really followed suit with my mom. But I, as this oldest hero child, was trying to keep the peace as a kid, right? I was the one mediating theological debates between them from when I was about 8, because they would ask me my opinion. I went to both churches on Sunday morning.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Catholic Mass, then I went to Catholic school during the week, Catholic Mass, then Dad picked me up. I did evangelical Sunday school, then later service, would do youth group when I was able to get there. Got really heavy into that.
Can I just jump in for one? Like an 8-year-old child having to be in between an argument of is so unfair to a child. So unfair.
And that's really how I have made peace with it. And I write that in the memoir. 8-year-old kids should not be mediating debates on the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I tell another story that at my grandmother's funeral, when I was 16 at the Catholic funeral, I got terrified because I was asked to do a reading from one of the quote unquote Catholic books of the Bible that's not in the Protestant Bible, and fearing I was going to get in trouble. Yeah. Because, go on.
It's, it's like when I think about, wars that have been, prosecuted over this very issue, nations that have divided, like blood that's been shed over, Protestant versus Catholic, that was all like personified and directly in your home. Like you, you were embodying that like age old conflict,
Yes. And as I note in the book, my family is originally from the countries of the former Yugoslavia, Croatia, Serbia. And yes, so much of that ethno-religious conflict is over, yes, on one hand, nationalism, but a lot of that nationalism falls along denominational lines, with Serbians being Orthodox, Bosnians being Muslim, and Croatians being Catholic. And it feels like I had a microcosm of that in my house. And even when politics inflame in the Middle East, which has happened my entire lifetime, having Arab friends, having Jewish friends, I can really tap into and feel both sides' pain. And so I just have to say that in liberal circles, when some of that shaming can happen around, well, you have to pick a side, I do agree with that on a lot of issues around morality. Yet I also know the pain of being stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
And like in my case, I really did love both parents.
Yeah.
And I knew that making one happy most times would piss the other one off.
Oh my gosh.
And vice versa. And it was a hard path.
What was their relationship like while all this was going on? I mean, like, because,
yeah. I know some days it seemed like they were any other married couple. On other days, and then as I grew up, it seemed to intensify more and more. there was just always conflict. I mean, sometimes it was about silly things like the way the thermostat was set in the house, because he liked the house cooler, she liked it warmer. But this was just the undercurrent of everything in my life was over religion. And another story I tell in the book was how when the first Gulf War broke out and I had my first major public panic attack over this rapture anxiety that my mother wasn't going to make it. So I grew up my whole childhood loving my mother very much, feeling more attached to her than my dad, really, but believing she was going to hell.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, your dad literally believed the rest of you were going to hell for Catholicism, and particularly worshiping Mary, that was a particular evil.
He believes that right now, which is why I don't have a substantial relationship with him. Because I just find that to be so violent that we believe these things about good people. And even as I'm saying that, he'd be like, that's the lie the devil told you. I mean, you know it. You know the arguments, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, part of what fundamentally started this thing that we call deconstruction is when I got out of my parents' house and into the world, I started meeting these people I was supposed to be afraid of.
Evil people, yeah.
And I found, I'll use their language, a greater witness of Christ's love.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
And I said, something doesn't compute here with the way I was raised. So
yeah.
Go ahead, Ashley. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry I'm just so curious about this family dynamic. So like, how did your dad find Assemblies of God anyway? Like, how did that unfold?
As I know, because I'm sure there's a lot of this history, I don't know and was not privy to, but, I have learned a lot as part of my own therapy and piecing things together. I mean, the official story is that Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker were the televangelists that converted him. He would watch late night TV. And part of the interesting thing is he was laid off at the time in the early 80s. He had about an 18-month layoff from his job. And it's textbook how cults and extreme religious groups can get to people when they're in periods of significant life transition. And that was definitely where he was at. Somebody who interviewed me yesterday also got me to think that I know he was involved in the People of Praise, which is a charismatic movement within the Catholic Church, even before he converted. And I'd never thought twice about them until I heard that Amy Coney Barrett was in that movement as well. And so when she got installed in the Supreme Court, I looked deep into them and it's like, oh, wow, maybe this is where it started. So, because I often make the joke that I still consider myself one foot in the Catholic world. But I say I'm a Joe Biden Catholic, not a Clarence Thomas Catholic, not an Amy Coney Barrett Catholic. And as somebody asked me yesterday, maybe your dad didn't like the Joe Biden Catholicism, the more liberal progressive Catholicism, because I will say that's overall the Catholicism I grew up in. The Catholic Church I went to, even though there were a lot of like shitty mean girl dynamics there, a lot of some theology shaming, but we still did liturgical dance and talked about social justice. It was a much friendlier experience overall. But then I really saw the more conservative sides of the Catholic faith when I worked for the Catholic Church, a Catholic parish in Europe, and then came to Franciscan University of Steubenville here in the US, which, I mean, Alan Keyes was one of our keynote speakers at a major campus event. It was just really ensconced in the conservative political Catholicism. And that's when I really opened my eyes to, wow, when you say you're Catholic, that can mean so many different things. When you say you're Christian, that can mean so many different things.
Yeah. That's what I always ask my Christian nationalist friends, like, we're a Christian nation. Which kind of Christian?
I wrote a piece during the election called Define Christian, because I've just learned to ask that of people when they identify as a Christian.
So being in this environment between these two religions and all, and people, I think a lot of Christians sort of poo-poo the idea that Christianity in and of its or religion in and of itself can traumatize a child.
Yeah.
How did this manifest itself in your life as your life went along? How did the trauma of these religious struggles manifest themselves?
So a lot of this I am sharing with you with the benefit of hindsight and self-study and 20 plus
Totally.
years of therapy.
Totally. We don't know it's happening when it's happening, do we?
At the time, and I was pretty happy with how I was able to tell this story in the memoir, when I was around 9 years old, I was overcome with this sense of, I don't want to be here. And I had enough know-how at 9 to know what unaliving oneself was. And, you know, young kids do end their life. I had a friend at 12 die by suicide, right? And so those thoughts were swirling in me from the young age, but it automatically went to, but I would go to hell if I did that. So I'm just going to pray for the rapture. And so during my 4th grade year, which was one of my hardest years at school with bullies, it was, you know, dear Jesus, please come back today. Please come back today. Please come back today.
Yeah.
So there was that, both praying for the rapture and having extreme rapture anxiety, that as I shared, Mom wasn't going to go to heaven, because when the first Gulf War happened, that end times theology was at a fever pitch in the house. With Saddam Hussein is coming back and rebuilding Babylon, and any day now Jesus is coming back. And the joke I make in the book is it's 2024 and we're still waiting.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I didn't realize that. So I just think my life was this chronic pitch of depression and anxiety. And you could read more about this in the memoir. There were some other traumatic experiences too, of sexual nature. Obviously the school bullying, which happened in this Catholic context, was pretty intense. I also knew from about the age of 11 that I was attracted to girls. I was still attracted to boys. You know, I now have a real clear picture of my bisexuality, but at the time it was just something that felt so right and so organic, was flawed, was sinful. And I had a lot of feelings. I mean, I was this very deeply feeling child who cried when I could. The joke was that I was the softie who cried during the movies, but I would be crying all the time if I was able to. So I think that's where a lot of the dissociative identities were able to form to help me navigate a lot of this. Because I know I was born a deeply feeling kid. I cried for days when they painted Big Bird blue and Follow That Bird. And I think a lot of those deeply feeling sensitivities can make me good at what I do now. But when I grew up in this theology that told me everything I was and everything I felt and everything my body felt was bad, by the time I left their house, of course, I was drinking alcohol and wanting to use things because I didn't know what the fuck to do with these feelings. I didn't know how to handle coming out to myself at 19 when it was this great peace that came over me saying, yeah, you're bisexual. Duh. You can't do anything with it because you will lose everything, especially your family, everything you've ever known.
Oh. Just sitting with that for a second.
Yeah. I know. Me too. But like, I'm struck too by what an insightful child you were. You know, like, it is remarkable that at such a young age you were aware of this conflict and like, you know, like, I think that's quite unusual.
Now I'm sitting with that because sometimes it's hard to know how much of it was I really aware of then, or how much of this, as I said, is with the benefit of hindsight and self-study.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I do know that the hypersensitivity, the deeply, I won't call it because that sounds pejorative, but this deeply feeling state was something that the whole family was aware of in me. Even my maternal grandmother would say, "Oh, you're a little chicken heart like me." And she meant it as a compliment, that we cried very easily. We were very attuned. Yeah. We were very sensitive. And I'm going to go, and I say this in the book, but I'll try to emphasize it here. I think it's folks like us who are then most susceptible to being spiritually wounded. Because as I've shared, everything in me is wired for that sense of meaning and connection and feeling and love. And so when you're told that every natural tendency in your being in those regards is bad, goes against what the church says, I think it's going to hurt more than if you're born the kind of person who just maybe cares, but isn't so deeply dug in these emotional places.
I want to make sure and note for people, and particularly those who may be listening and not seeing, who are on the audio podcast, that Dr. Marich is a DID, multiple dissociative identity disorder. And so, as you say in the book, occasionally will refer to self in multiples. And so we and call yourself we or us. And so she was referencing us there as your multiple person.
Can
so
you
just so people understand that?
Is it okay to ask about, can you tell us a little bit about your system and your process of learning your parts, and kind of fill us in on how you all function together?
So I have to say, one of the comments I make in the book, because I did go back and forth with, do I talk so much about being a dissociative system in this book? Would it be too off-putting for people? Because I talk a lot in my previous book called Dissociation Made Simple about this. But part of me feels like when somebody speaks out against authority or the church, one of the comebacks we always get is, they're just mentally ill. And so it's like, shit, I'm leading with it. I know I'm mentally ill. And this is why. This is the story of why. Like, all of you and your, made us this way. And that was like my 9-year-old part. It's like, it's your fault. Because you can get, really pissed and really fiery. So I was diagnosed formally in 2004. It was at the beginning of my journey when I was working on my graduate degree in counseling. And I was 2 years sober at that point from my addiction recovery. And even my 12-step sponsor knew I was going to need more trauma-specific care. And when I started my graduate internship, that's when everything really started coming to life. And this is often what happens, that when drugs and alcohol get arrested, when they leave the picture, all these earlier in life dissociative tendencies emerge. So I didn't even know what the word dissociation was until around this time. But then once I started learning about it in school, it's like, I did that. I definitely did that. And then I started remembering things my parents would say, like, Jamie's off in her own little world again. Or my father's famous line was, Jamie looks like she's been beamed in the head with a fastball.
Wow.
And the we that Paul pointed out, we were doing that from childhood, referring to ourselves as a we. And I also remember one time my dad making a joke about that, like, who's we? The royal we? And so a lot of dissociative systems are asked, like, when did you know? And I think the answer is, I've always known. I just didn't have words for it. And so when I received the diagnosis in 2004, and I'm technically diagnosed with partial dissociative identity disorder, or OSDD, meaning I don't have significant amnesia between my parts. Like, we are a co-conscious system. The metaphor I use is Dr. Jamie, who's talking to you is kind of the shapeshift between Dr. Jamie and Jamie. Dr. Jamie is very much our professional, get shit done part. And then there's Jamie, who's like the human that thinks a lot of what's in our field is full of BS. And there's three other major passengers in the car with us. And once we were diagnosed, our life suddenly made sense. And even the whole thing with diagnosis, I try not to be too married to diagnosis, because I'm more than my diagnosis. I get concerned when some people get so like, I am my diagnosis. Yet I know in our case, it just was nice to know that this thing had a name, because for a lot of years we just thought we were crazy. And then as a professional, a lot of the implicit and sometimes explicit messaging I got is don't talk about this. Because yeah, it's okay to say you're in recovery from addiction. It's okay to say that you've had mental health struggles, but this diagnosis is like the worst one you can have, and people aren't going to take you seriously. And so I did live a lot of my professional career, still specializing in trauma, but I wasn't so out about it. And then a series of events happened over the years where I progressively started coming out, especially in safer places, professionally a little bit more and more. And then in 2018, the person I referred to in the memoir only as my second husband tried to use it against me, and he failed. And that was really a lot of the freedom that I needed to say, this is us. And I have felt the need to talk about it this candidly, in especially my professional circles, because there's still a lot of stigma, even amongst therapists, about dissociative identities.
Yeah, we're all we all have a Dr. What is it, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in there somewhere that's gonna come out and kill somebody at some point.
Oh, and that's the media stereotype. That so many people in the field have taken on, which is sad.
But I love, my therapist always tells me you have to be brilliant to be dissociative. Your mind has to be able to do so many amazing things. And I'm like, yes, absolutely.
We're fiercely brilliant. Yes.
Yes. Right. What are you saying? That reverently and wonderfully made. I love that. I do want to get to, and I hope we have enough time. We may have to have you back again or whatever.
Oh, anytime. I love talking to you both.
Because I do want to talk about your you talk about pilgrimage as healing. I think that's so important, and it's why I would recommend your book as opposed to some other deconstruction books or some other mental health books. Is your journey to restore your lineage and family, even, and how much that was healing in you. Can you tell us a little bit about your pilgrimage and the healing that it had for you?
I love the concept of pilgrimage, so much so that in chapter 6 of the book, I say that what is called technically deconstruction and reconstruction, I refer to as a pilgrimage. And maybe that's the Catholic influence on me, that pilgrimage is a very important concept in Catholicism. It's to cross a threshold. And in Catholicism, pilgrimages are often seen as quests, as trips, as travels that you have to make, where you may have to endure some hardship, like walking the Camino de Santiago or going to Lourdes or Medjugorje or Fatima. I've been to all three. It's
all things we mock as Protestants, by the way. Oh, you crazy Catholic,
100%. But I consider the time I spent going to India and the holy ashrams there as pilgrimage, and the time I spent in Israel and Palestine as pilgrimage. It's this idea of getting uncomfortable to really find yourself. And I can look at my whole, I don't mean this word as an insult, crazy life and all of my ups and downs and spiritual twists and turns. And it's all been part of the pilgrimage to get me to where I am today talking to you.
And you went to Croatia. What did that mean to you?
Yeah, I literally went back to my ancestral homeland. So I first visited Croatia in 1998, which was late in my life. I was 18 because the wars had prohibited easy travel before then, and Chernobyl before that. And stepping back on my ancestral soil changed me in a way I tried to put words to in the book.
Wow.
It was riveting. And so I ended up living in the Croatian part of Bosnia-Herzegovina for 3 years, from 2000 to 2003. And my story was very much where I feel I had to go back to where my grandparents and great-grandparents came from in order to find some piece of me that was missing.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the reasons I still stay connected to Catholicism. And I like this term that is used a lot now. I'm culturally Catholic, because it is so entwined with where my family comes from.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just something that I needed in order to heal. And I still go back to Croatia as often as I can. I've been trying to go now once a year in the last several years. I am a Croatian citizen. Like, even that was an important part of getting that citizenship. And I make this comment in the book that my cousin, who I'm very close to, said, I think you're making the return trip for our great grandparents.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Huh.
And so, yeah,
Can
that's been pilgrimage for me.
Can you say just a little bit more about what you experience when you're there? Like, what are you picking up? What are you adding to the inner world when you do that?
So what's interesting is when I'm in Croatia, I am starkly aware of how American I am with some of my love of the conveniences and whatnot. Yet when I'm there, there is such a connection to the land that I just feel this sense of, and when I hear the singing, especially in the folk traditions and the language, I do my best to speak it. But there was a time in my adult life, I went many years without really speaking Croatian because I learned it in my late teens, and I used it when I was there. And then when I was in the US kind of getting my graduate training and all of that, some of my connection had fallen away. And then when I stepped foot in Croatia again in 2018, I spoke more Croatian in 2 weeks than I had in 15 years. And it was that sense of, I've not been tending to this part of me. Mm-hmm. So I can feel very fiercely about the importance of homeland, like literally connection to land, to people, to the old ways. Even as I recognize my Americanness. And I think a creed that defines a lot of my life is the idea of both and, or dialectics, right? That I can be both American and Croatian. I can be both somebody who loves God very much and somebody who gets really critical about the stuff people do in God's name. You know?
Love it. I think one thing as Protestants and, Assemblies of God, and even we're kind of from the vineyard lineage.
Yeah.
There's mysticism of prophetic words and hearing God and praying for healing and those things. But Catholicism really holds on to the mysticism of the spiritual world and seeing a statue cry, or, those kind of things. And I just think there's something I'm learning now that I'm untethered to Protestant Christianity, that the idea of, I want to hear from my ancestors of healing that needs to take place in our family line, and I want to be a part of that to draw that out. Those type of mysticisms that we've called evil, and we said, no, you can only the white Euro Christianity is correct.
Right.
I feel like I get to explore those things now, which it just has been really fruitful over the last few years of my life.
Yeah, and the saints, I mean, on my dad's side, it was saints are bad. Catholics pray to saints.
Absolutely.
And shit, I mean, the saints show us just how cool humanity is. And and so much of the error of especially evangelical Protestant theology is to say Catholics worship Mary, Catholics worship the saints. No, they're intercessors. And we hang up pictures of them just like we would hang up pictures of our loved ones.
Yeah.
And like one of the saints I have a big devotion to, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, because she was an expressive artist and a herbal healer and into so many of the things I'm into. It's just so beautiful to see all the ways that she loved God. Yeah. And I can connect with God in those similar ways.
Yeah, that was interesting to read in the book. Like, cause I grew up literally with a Southern Baptist preacher father who was like telling me, make sure, like, if you see the kids with the plaid outfits on, walking down the street on the Saturday afternoon or whatever, on a school day, you need to stay away from those guys. I mean, it was very like Southern Baptist, like Catholics are evil and all that. But I love that point. Like I never even puts everything in a totally different light, that the saints are inspiration. They're like That's super cool. I'm sitting here wondering, Paul, if you would think when you went on your cross country trip and you ended up in Springfield, Missouri, do you feel like that day had any pilgrimage like qualities for you? Was it, I know you were like, I never want to go back there, but I'm just wondering if there was sort of some kind of a processing.
I had parts saying, what the fuck are we doing here? Get me the fuck out of here. Interesting question. And I haven't felt that thus far. It was way more painful than I expected it to be.
You felt very repelled, right? Like being there, you're like, no, I got to get away from this place.
Yeah. There were little parts that recognized where we were in the, the uniqueness of the landscape of the roads and stuff. And we're just like, wait, what are we doing here? It's like a pet you have that recognizes, wait, we're going to the vet, aren't we? We're not going to the park. We're going to the vet, and that's the parts were like, what the fuck are we doing here? And it was pretty unexpected. And we ended up just going out into the field. It was a little bit cathartic. We stood out in the field and just cried for, I'm a crier too, Jamie. And we just cried for quite a while. And that was helpful to just allow those parts to be really sad of being there. And and we pulled up at the Airbnb, and it was this farmhouse with these two kind of barn type buildings, and it looked exactly like my grandparents' farm. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the worst nightmare I could imagine.
Yeah.
But maybe if I sit with those parts a little bit and we start to think about what it meant to be there, maybe we can do some make it into a little bit of a healing pilgrimage. I do love that concept. So maybe. And then Ashley was like, let's go back sometime together. I'm like, hell no.
Yeah. I have I can understand your point about the connection to the land. Like when I think of my formative years and like the homeland, the Southern Midwest, I don't want to live there necessarily, but anytime I hear reference to that part of the country, or obviously, talk to a family member that's still there, there is absolutely I'm like, oh, in fact, I'll even say like, oh, the homeland, there's a powerful spiritual connection to place.
And on the American side of things, I will boldly declare I am a proud Ohioan, and I am grieving to see Ohio, which has been so beautifully known as a swing state, go so red in the last 8 years. And it's one of the reasons I know on the American side, I need to stay here. I just feel such a connection to my home state in a way that even when I hear people talk shit about Ohio, I'm like, watch it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this,
my hometown,
having driven cross country to get my daughter to grad school and also driving around that area a bit, by far the most beautiful highways in all of America are in the state of Ohio. You can eat off the road. You can pull over to the road. Like the roadside stops are like fine dining, kind of like I was talking about earlier. You go into these places, they are stunningly beautiful. Which is kind of a joke, but also says something. It says the public realm that we collectively care for will receive our best. I mean, it spoke volumes to me. So there you go. Cool. Highway art.
I do want us to have a little bit of time to talk about Wicked.
Yes, let's.
Jamie, I do have to say, reading in the book the part about the mauling when your dad really took you down. I had one of those in my life where for about 2.5 hours, my dad, I disassociated from it. So I don't remember too much of it, but worthless was the word that really sticks with me from it all. And I was reading it, just feeling it so deeply in my heart. I want to tell Jamie, you are so beautiful and so wonderful and so deserving of love and so amazing. Fuck your dad. I hope he's not. Well, I don't care if he is listening.
I doubt
Fuck
he'd be
him.
listening, but yes.
Fuck him. It just that my heart so went out to you at that moment, and I can so relate to that moment. So just
Thank you.
giving you love and acceptance and affirmation that you are beautiful and fantastic and brilliant and perfect just as you are.
It means the world, Paul. Thank you so much.
Or so what is your relationship like with mom and dad now? Like you mentioned earlier, distant with dad.
I am essentially what is now called no contact with my dad. We are cordial at family events because we care about the family members that are there. And it's been off and on that way for many years, where I've gone through periods of trying to have a relationship with him. And it just inevitably reaches this place of, if you really believe these things about me, I can't do it. And, a very dear Jewish friend of mine has taught me a twist on honor thy father and thy mother, which is, if the relationship is so toxic, God doesn't expect you to engage in it. But I do know, like, if my father ever needs end of life care, or whatnot, that's in my heart to be there in some way. But that doesn't mean I have to have a relationship and expose myself to that. I mean, over the years, I think I've had a pretty decent relationship with my mother and brother. I know they're both not too crazy about me airing the family laundry. So things may be a little more distant now than in the past. And my brother, whose name is also Paul, he is, Father Paul, but he's also a pastor of his church. That kid is still one of my heroes, and just a phenomenal part of my story. And I really believe he was meant to be a Catholic priest. And even when I started writing this, I said to him, the you that's my brother will appreciate what I have to say. The you that's a Catholic priest, especially a more conservative Catholic priest, I think will struggle with this. But I think that shows that even, holy people are people of many parts.
Yeah.
I always take solace in the fact that Jesus' mother and brothers showed up to get him one day. And I always see that story as, they're hearing from others, like, do you know what your son is doing? Do you know what he's saying? And they're like, oh, we better go get him. He's hurting the family name. And they show up to get him. And he says, oh, that's not my mother. Those aren't my brothers. The people who are here, who are with me, this is my family. But then at the end, there she is at the cross. They obviously had a reunion at some point. So
right.
Even Jesus was no contact for some point, I think.
That's a good point. Thanks for putting it that way. And as I write about in the memoir, family of choice has been very important to me, like it is to a lot of queer people or outcasts. And I do dedicate the book to my cousins, because as I have aged as a person, I have been blessed and fortunate to develop phenomenal connections with most of my cousins who have looked at my story and have sent me nothing but the best, who I have very meaningful connections with now with many of them. One of my cousins, James, he read each chapter as I was writing it and just gave me a lot of family perspective on things. So the book's dedicated to my cousins. Because I remember in 2016 being in my therapist's office after Trump was elected the first time, saying, I don't know if I can stay in touch with my immediate family after all of this. And she's like, are there other people in your family who may get you? And it just struck me like a lightning bolt, like my cousins, of course, my cousins. So. All
right. Before we ask Ashley to sing her favorite Wicked tune, the book is You Lied to Me About God. Boy, I love the cover. That is,
I do too. Look at that precious.
Isn't that awesome?
Sweet, precious.
Where do you want to tell people to find it, Dr. Marich?
Well, it's wherever books are sold. So if you like patronizing brick and mortar bookstores, they can order it for you. It's distributed by Penguin Random House. Most Barnes and Nobles have it. If you go on Amazon, it's there. Barnes and Noble online, it's there. If you do indiebooks.com, you can find it. So yeah, wherever is good for you to get the book. It's also out on audiobook through Audible and a lot of other audiobook outlets. I had the privilege of reading it, which was another very deep layer of the healing for me. Yeah.
Wow.
And that,
And-
you know, the kids in the plaid jumpers, like
I know
actually-
exactly. I can see it now. My next door neighbors whose kids were they went to the Immaculate Conception School in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and like it looked just like that.
That was my first day of first grade. I was 6 years old in that
Aw.
picture.
Look how
Oh my
precious.
goodness. Oh my
Precious,
goodness.
precious.
All right. Yeah, definitely find the book. Ashley and I both give it thumbs
Two
up.
thumbs up. Two thumbs
Yay,
up.
thank
Speaking
you.
of two thumbs up. All right. So Paul and I were already planning on sharing our
Wicked.
love of this movie, Wicked, when on our final segment here of What's on Our Mind, because it absolutely rocked us. Like, we were in the theater. There's about 15 of us in this huge theater on Thanksgiving morning. I mean, we were like sobbing at the end. And I was just like, oh my God, like the whole movie's over and it's quiet in the theater. People are getting up and I'm still just sobbing uncontrollably. So this was going to be our topic anyway, Dr. Jamie.
Yes.
And then Paul shares that he heard you on a podcast going on about the deep layers of the movie. So tell us what you saw when you saw Wicked.
So I had seen the stage show twice before, so I knew a lot of the themes that I was getting into.
And we do need to mention Wizard of Oz was one of your favorites as a kid.
Yes, and that shows up in the memoir, how the Wizard of Oz was my story, and Judy Garland's Dorothy was just like a protector figure to me. And when the whole Wicked Broadway phenomenon came out, I was kind of distant from it at first because, like, I didn't want people touching with my Wizard of Oz. And then when I saw the stage shows, it was, this is a feminist retelling of the Wizard of Oz. It's not a prequel. It has a lot of prequel qualities, but it's just so interesting to me that the film had been talked about for years. And here it is dropping in fall of 2024, 2 weeks after Donald Trump gets elected again. And if you know what you're watching, the parallels are obvious that Oz is someone who has no real power. Yet it's a story of the power that an outcast can hold, the power that a woman can hold, right? And we tend to vilify, I think, the people who have the purest power. I don't want to give it away because if you've not experienced Wicked,
Spoiler
go out
alert.
and watch
That's right.
go out and watch it and take it in. And I'm loving hearing it from people who aren't familiar with the Broadway musical to see how they received it. But it was, and one of the pieces I wrote issued this observation that The Wizard of Oz came out 6 days before World War II started in 1939.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Not America's involvement yet, but when Germany invaded Poland, Wizard of Oz came out 6 days before. And I think for a lot of us who know what we're dealing with here in Trump 2.0 and that regime, and all of this talk about Christian nationalism now, Paul, you know what I mean. I'm like, shit, I grew up in this. None of this is new to me. I know what a lot of, especially scary conservative Christians want. And, they will continue to bend the knee to the wizard. And
so is it a story of a white man pulling the levers of power and maintaining it by turning everybody else against each other? Is that
that's
a little
part
bit?
of it? Yeah,
Okay.
he reveals that as one of his tools. It's using smoke and mirrors and big words wrongly or incorrectly. I should say it's bravado. Bigly, it's bravado and showmanship over substance. But yeah, the wizard has that famous line, like, back where I come from, we learn to turn people against each other if you want to get anywhere. And we know he comes from Omaha, Nebraska. So there you go.
The wizard comes from Omaha, Nebraska?
Yeah. So we know that from the Wizard of Oz, that he's from Omaha, that his balloon says Omaha. And if you go back and listen to the soundtrack or watch the movie again, spoiler alert, the magic that he recites when everybody thought he knew
Yeah.
the words of the Grimmery. He's just saying Omaha different ways over and
Oh,
over and
you're
over again.
right. You're right.
Oh my
Yeah,
I
gosh.
can hear that in my mind right now.
Omaha.
Yeah.
So the Wizard of Oz is American. The Wizard of Oz is American.
Oh my gosh.
So
Of
yeah,
course, Omaha is the one blue county in Nebraska.
right.
There, you know.
There's just so much richness in the movie that I think if you are concerned about what is coming ahead, what's already here, yeah, give it a watch to get inspired.
I had to stop the podcast, by the way, because you guys said you were going to do spoilers, and I have not seen the Broadway play. So if people don't know, the movie
right.
is part one, act one
Yep.
of, and there's another one coming out whenever it's going to be coming out.
Next year, same time.
Okay.
So yeah, I didn't give any spoilers for the part 2, but spoilers for the if you haven't seen the movie or the Broadway show yet.
Ashley, what did you experience and see in the movie and the story?
Well, for one thing, like, I so appreciate how just the power of art and the artistry that is on display in this film. I mean, it just takes you to places that you can't, it takes you way longer to reason to get there, but you're just instantly caught up. Like we have a musical theater kid, an aspiring opera singer. And so we grew up, like driving carpool and seeing all these shows. And like, the more I was exposed to live performance art, the more I'm really, really moved by it. And I also think about like our experience in charismatic Christian churches and like 45 minutes to an hour of like very compelling music every Sunday. Like that's a big thing for me, is just like the actual art of it and being so in awe of the human genius that can think of every little movement, every perfectly framed thing, the costumes, the expressions, the flip of the hair, oh my God, it is out of this world. Like people that can think about all those details and bringing it together in a way in this like meta story and meta themes and narratives that, I am just so swept up into it. So, so that for me, the visuals, the just, reflecting on the genius, the singing itself, like you were talking about the singing in your homeland and how that just moves you in such a powerful way. I'm having like a revival in my chair listening to Defying Gravity and Popular, like it's just
it was perfect.
Yes, the singing. And then, ultimately, just the character and the courage of Elphaba, the outcast who is like, what? No, we're supposed to be for these good and righteous things. And yet she gets painted as wicked. And yet she is the one who is upholding the very thing that all the land is saying they want and value, except they're, catering to this other nonsense. And she's the one who is upholding the righteous principles of the land, and like her courage in that. It's lights out. Awesome.
And I think that's what we're doing here as recovering evangelicals or deconstructing people. Like, I know what they're saying about me now, because I probably said the same things about people like me 20 years ago plus.
Yeah.
And
they're just hurt. They're just hurt.
Yeah. It just goes to this, how is the story told? Because the people that, as I already shared, who got painted as wicked, once I really got to know them, they were the ones of deep integrity.
Yep. That, Paul and I had such a similar journey with just in our own community, and like sort of our faith informed and inspired us to believe that things should be different in the place where we live. So that got us involved in like local stuff, community development and all that. And like, as we got outside of the practice of Christianity in the church, and then going to a day job that had nothing to do with that, Monday to Friday, and we got more into no, let's live our faith. The people that were walking around, our former charismatic words would be like, the people who seem to have the heart for the things of God were people who were absolutely not welcome in any polite company on a Sunday morning in a congregation. And we just had this insight of like, just follow the spirit, follow the hunger of people who are hungry for change. Doesn't matter what brand, doesn't matter what words they put on it, but just pay attention to that. and like honestly, that kind of led us out of what we were in and to where
I'll
we are
give
now.
that an amen.
For me, Wizard of Oz was hard because the tornado scared the shit out of me.
Oh,
The
yeah.
flying monkey scared the shit
Yeah.
out of me.
Yeah.
And I had nightmares about trees grabbing me. So it was hard. It was kind of hard to watch. But I always thought, I find, the Trump parallels particularly interesting. And I definitely will watch the movie again and look at it. I always thought The Wizard of Oz was more of a commentary about God and God being a man behind a curtain rather than some big fierce being in it. And it can be that on some level, I think. But where I am in my journey and with the DID and really figuring out who this person is and really looking into the trans world and all of these different ideas of gender and sexuality and things. And I've been reading this wonderful book called Falling Back in Love with Being Human. And there's one section that talks about, to trans women and saying, you come from a long line of monsters. And when you're characterized as a monster, just realize the power of being a monster and how beautiful a monster is. And, all of these, you are a part of the lineage of the witches that they burned. And every time they burned one, another monster was made from that ash. And I saw that happening with Elphaba in just that, okay, if you're going to call me a monster, let's put on the hat, give me the broom, let's go. I'm going to embody that and be this badass, powerful bitch. Here we go,
I'll give that an amen too.
Yeah, that just really, I just wanted to come up out of my chair watching that. And so I can't wait to see how it goes from there to the second part. And then it's a little bit incongruent with then she's the one that gets the house lands on her or whatever.
No, just wait. You'll see how.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm excited. I'm excited for people who don't know what's coming next. Yay.
All right. That sounds good. Well, I love seeing all that meaning in it. And I'll be interested to see what our daughter thinks about Ariana Grande in it. She's always kind of like, she didn't like Anne Hathaway and Les Mis, and those types of things.
Yes. Yeah. So
I love Ariana. I know when the casting choice was first made, I'm like, a pop singer. But I do think Ariana does great acting work. And I think
she was
I thought she was perfectly cast.
She was mesmerizing on screen. I mean, you couldn't take every single movement and frame. She was mesmerizing. And I think it literally fit to have a pop star. Yes.
It
did. Absolutely. I will say, and I'm no expert, but I hang around our daughter and she's been singing since she was 7. And I'm like, hearing her say all these very hard technical things about like the actual human voice and all that.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm totally mesmerized by Ariana Grande the whole time. And then Kristen Chenoweth steps on stage and sings. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now
there's a difference. Yes, there is.
There was such a fullness and a power that came out of her. And then the other lady whose name I forget, that
Idina Menzel.
Yes. I was like, okay. And there's the OGs right there, but it doesn't in any way take away from Ariana's. I mean, it was just unreal.
I loved every casting choice.
Yeah, you're right. Every casting choice. Gosh, look at us going on about this. Like, this is not just like a movie experience. There is
it's an experience.
Real power packed into the show. That is real.
Yes.
And our daughter Sydney would say, I think she has said before, Ariana is a well-trained voice.
Yeah,
she's not just
by
a pop
training.
singer.
She's a theater.
But I felt you could tell the difference even between, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the actress that played Elphaba, but even their voice, there was just a difference to me between the power and
Cynthia
resonance.
Erivo comes from Broadway, who played Elphaba.
She can.
Well,
she can sing, as my people would say.
Yes, I love in this podcast, I've been able to talk about my spiritual self, my therapist self, and my musical theater kid self. This is great.
Well,
Hey,
wonderful.
we are the full package here at Evangelical-ish. You never really know what you're going to
Perfect.
get.
It's the ish that
Yeah.
makes it. Yep.
Well, thank you to everybody that has hung out with us. And Dr. Marich, what a privilege to have you on. And so again, You Lied to Me About God is the book. We hope everybody will pick it up and check it out and follow Jamie at her website and all of that good stuff. Anything else, Ashley?
I think that's a wrap.
All right.
We're-
Loved
we're-
hanging out with you all tonight. We'll see you again
See
soon.
you